It was during the convention. The prophet had on this robe right here. This robe right here. He said, this robe right here represents the royal prince. He said, if you obey my voice, he said, it represents power. And if you obey my voice, you will share in that power with me. Islam? So the things that he presented to us meant something, right? And it affected the ones that were in power because they saw he had the numbers, right? But it makes no sense if you get the knowledge for yourself. The prophet says, for your selfish selves, right? And don't do anything to wake up the masses of the people, right? Because the Moorish Science Temple of America was designed to bring Asiatics within the constitutional form of government. The Sons of Italy was created for the Italian-American sons to come back in the constitutional fold of government.
That's right.
Islam, they have a Korean version of it, a Japanese version of it, a Chinese version, you name it.
That's right.
A Jewish version of it. You really think B'nai B'rith and the ADL and all that stuff is?
Right.
Right? It's teaching them how to function in this government under this constitution.
Islam.
Right? Anyone seen Gangs in New York?
Islam.
Right? What was the hall that they talked about on there? Y'all remember? What was the name of it? Y'all remember? Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was named after Chief Tammany, of which there were 3, by the way. Okay? But the point is, they created this hall to teach Irish who just got here how to live under a republic, because they didn't know what living under a republic was. Living under a constitution was, because they were used to living under a monarchy, under a king, right? Who held the sovereignty, right? And the people got whatever the king decided to let them have, right? So when they got here, as soon as they got off the boat, the ones who were already here had been through that process, said, look, come. You know what I'm saying? Come to Tammany Hall and learn what it is to be a citizen.
That's right.
I'm like, what's that? Right? Just like Moorish Americans now, when you tell them, you know, you got to be a citizen. What's a citizen? What's that?
Right.
Chinese, yeah, you got to be a citizen. What's a citizen? They have the slightest idea what a citizen is. Right? Give you an example right now. If you don't own a firearm, which we're not having that conversation. We're not doing that tonight. Right? So get that out your mind. I know, I felt that one. We're not doing that on the holy night. Okay?
Scratch that.
Scratch it, yeah. Put that over here, right? But if you don't, for argument's sake, if you don't have a firearm, and something takes place in your house, okay? And, you know, everybody, they got those 3 numbers you can call, 911, right? Now, are the police, let me ask a question to the body, I'm talking to intelligent people, I know, my family. Are the police under any obligation to come and help you as an individual?
No.
And if not, prove it. That's nothing I stopped speaking out of it, because you think it's right. Write this down. Warren versus the United States. It's case law. This is what they call in law. Stare decisis deals with case law. Okay? Warren versus the United States. $1981, right? What happens is, and the details are kind of vulgar, so I kind of clean it up for the whole day. There were a group of women who shared a house together. So it was like basically one woman that was renting rooms. There was other women that lived upstairs. The women that were upstairs heard, some glass breaking or whatever, or some screaming downstairs. They got scared and they ran out of the windows, called 911. There were 2 guys that broke into the house. When they come in, they violated the woman downstairs. The women upstairs called 911. The police came. The 2 guys downstairs heard the police coming and ran out of the house. So when the police got there, they didn't see the guys, right? Police did a perimeter search, took a report, whatever. They left. When they left, the guys came back. Gathered the women from upstairs, brought them downstairs, and violated all of them at once, right? They called the police again. Police never showed up. So the ladies got together and they sued the DC Police Department. Okay? When they sued the DC Police Department, It went through the inferior courts, got kicked up, Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled that the police departments that are in the United States of America are under no obligation to help individuals. I had a constitution up here. Y'all all right?
It's, when you look it up, if you look it up, it's going to be under Warren versus the District of Columbia.
Okay. Praise Allah. Y'all have heard this before? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. You've heard that before, right? How many words is that? Yeah, I have a lot of time on my hands to count stuff like that. Right? It's 52 words. Okay? Now, it says to promote the general welfare, not specific welfare, the general welfare. Meaning the welfare of the community as a whole. That is what the police department is for. Right? It's not for individuals. So, how do you, if you were going to, access the benefit of the police department, how do you access that? You access that as a body politic. You have to organize as a group body and move that way. That's how you are recognized by the city for them to allocate resources. For every car that goes out, there's monies that's spent. Tax dollars, which have to be accounted for. Islam? Why it's a big thing when, when a cop shoots someone in the whole internal affairs thing, each bullet costs money. Right? So you have to justify the use of each bullet. Right? Because each bullet you're paying for. You're paying for the bullets that end up in your family. Just something to think about. Right? But the point is, they're designed to help, organize bodies of people. And this is what civil societies were for. This is what civic associations were for. Islam? Moving on. So just research that case law. It's an interesting case. Read it when you get a chance. Stop being lazy. As our sister secretary said. Y'all lazy. Right? This is a good book. That's a quotable right there. You're going to hear that a lot. Get this book too. This is called Black Atlanta. Pardon the language. This is that language. Black Atlanta. You know we don't use the word black, right? It's called Images of America, Black Atlanta in the Roaring 20s. So this was Atlanta during the time of the Prophet. That's why this is important, okay? And it's by Herman Skip, that's his middle name, they have it in quotation marks, Mason Jr. Herman Skip Mason Jr. Again, Images of America, Black Atlanta in the Roaring 20s, right? I'm just gonna read a few paragraphs so we can set it, so you can get driving home about those images I showed you earlier. Right? It says, start here. By 1920, Atlanta's African American population was 62,796, which represented 31% of the total population. The Atlanta Community Chest provided the civic arm for the less fortunate in the black community. Sound familiar? Just spoke about it. Organizations such as Carrie Steele Orphanage, Gate City Free Kindergarten, Leonard Street Orphanage, Neighborhood Union, and the Phyllis Wheatley branch of the YWCA, the Colored Department of the Associated Charities, the Anti-Tuberculosis Association, the Travelers Aid, the Georgia Committee on Race Relations work to provide services for those in need. Write this down too. Mutual aid societies. Mutual aid societies. Also write down fraternal benefit societies. Write those down too. Okay? Mutual aid society and fraternal benefit society. It says the business community flourished. By the 1920s, there were 72 African American businesses and 20 professional offices on Auburn Avenue, including the Butler Street YMCA, so it had been there since the 20s, which opened in 1920 and became the meeting place for conventions that would come to town, kind of like Unity Hall was for the Moorish Science Temple of America. Islam, y'all had to know that the Moorish Science Temple of America operated in Unity Hall, but there were Masonic groups that operated in Unity Hall as well. 3140 Indiana Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, USA. Islam, y'all hear that at every meeting, that address, at the end of the Divine Constitutional Bylaws, right? But that's, you know, the prophet was functioning with other Asiatic groups. Why it was called Unity Hall. Islam? So get that out your head that you're going to live on your Moorish island somewhere.
Right.
And not have ties to the rest of the world. Okay? It says, the Herndon office building opened in 1924. The black-owned, and again this is their language, the black-owned Atlanta State Savings Bank established, keyword established, that's a master's word, research that, established in 1909 to encourage blacks to save, failed in 1922. Blacks and saving, and failed. Principles of civilization, I'll move on. But paved the way for the Citizens Trust Company Bank, which was organized in 1921. Citizens Trust is still here, 1921. The local chapter of the NAACP membership increased to 3,000 by the end of 1920 under the presidency of Reverend R.H. Singleton, who was pastor of Big Bethel AME Church until his death in 1923. In 1920, in New York City, the National Convention of the Universal Negro Improvement Association met. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the forerunner, who they're slandering, calling the Black Ponzi, spoke to approximately 25,000 blacks during a rally in Madison Square Garden. A year later, he formally organized the Empire of Africa. We pause that. Because chapter 47 is entitled what in your Quran?
Africa.
Look it up. I'm going to pause and wait for this. Look it up. Y'all got them Quran. Go to chapter 47. Just look at the title. We're not even going to read it. Just go to the title. When first word started, Egypt, of the what? Empire of Africa. Okay? So here we have Marcus Garvey organizing an empire of Africa. And you have Noble Drew Ali telling you, giving you the width and the breadth of that empire of Africa. All the dominions. Islam? You can't separate Marcus Garvey and Prophet Noble Drew Ali.
That's right.
In fact, I would venture to say you can't understand one without the other. Islam? If you want to know the civic side of the Moorish Science Temple of America, study Garvey. Islam? A year later, he formally organized the Empire of Africa and appointed himself the provisional president. It's not true. He was recognized by 27 nations.
That's right.
He attempted to appeal, though unsuccessfully, the League of Nations for permission to settle a colony in Africa. Garvey was ultimately convicted of mail fraud and sentenced to federal penitentiary. He was transported to Atlanta in February of 1923, where he served a 4-year sentence. He was released in November 1927, and was deported back to Jamaica. One important piece of evidence they left out was that Noble Drew Ali went to go visit Marcus Garvey, and coincidentally, after Noble Drew Ali left, now Marcus Garvey gets released.
Right.
We have the postcard that says it. Islam? Even though there were some Garvey supporters in Atlanta, most African Americans in the city were not interested in going back to Africa. Drew Ali said this is not a back to Africa movement in that sense. Yeah, we go back to Africa in the state of mind of our forefathers.
That's right.
But there's no need at this time, he said, of us going back to Africa physically. Islam? It was the era of the new Negro. Now, the old Negro wasn't good enough, I guess, so they got a new Negro. They talking about the 20s. By 1924 to 1929, the African-American migration northward decreased, and the new Negro was considered less a threat to whites. Again, their language. Lynching declined, though there were isolated cases throughout Georgia. Migration, urbanization, military life, combined with the democratic rhetoric of World War I, helped to intensify a new spirit of self-esteem among African Americans, along with the belief that their situation was intolerable. In the North, these forces led to the rise of both black nationalism and interracial cooperation. Excuse me. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, greater political activity, and the Harlem Renaissance. This period of great achievement for African Americans in art and literature featured writings from such persons as Countee Cullen, Claude McKay, Gene Toomer, James Weldon Johnson, Walter White, George Douglas Johnson, Amma Bontemps, Langston Hughes, and Zora Neale Hurston. Hughes and Hurston were affectionately referred to as Godfather and Godmother. Their work drew critical attention from both blacks and whites. Both Johnson and White had connections in Atlanta, both having attended Atlanta University. Toomer's classic book, Cain, was set in Georgia, where his distinguished grandfather, P.B.S. Pinchback, was born. That's a serious name, man. P.B.S. Pinchback. Boy, we need our forefathers. Praise and thank you, Prophet. In 1921, Toomer took a temporary job as a superintendent of the Georgia Normal and Industrial Institute in Sparta, Georgia. The book New Negro, edited by Alain Locke, created the foundation for the Renaissance. The musical stage was lit up in 1921 with U.B. Blake and Noble Sissies Shuffle Along. Atlanta would host the traveling stage review of this show in 1924. The toast of Broadway was a little pixie dancer named Florence Mills, who wooed the hearts of all. In the chorus line of Florence's musical was a young dancer named Josephine Baker. Theatrical performances by Paul Robeson and Ethel Waters dominated the decade. The fervor of this spirit of the Renaissance created a feeling of racial pride for African Americans, and the inability to express oneself creatively was removed, at least temporarily. Here we go. The Renaissance manifested itself in social, civic, and creative circles. Numerous social and civic clubs, fraternities, and sororities were established in Atlanta. The decade of the 20s saw the flourishing of such established clubs as the Chautauqua Literary Circle, the 12 Club, the Inquirers, the WGMs, the Junior Matrons, the Moso Lit Club, which was founded in 1922. Some of the chartered members of the latter were W.J. Faulkner, Mrs. W.H. Cunningham, and Ms. J.E. Salter, Mrs. Lemuel L. Foster, Mrs. A.D. Hamilton, and Mrs. J.O. Thomas, and others. Arguably, three of the most prestigious male groups were the Jorman Club, founded in 1912, the Kappa Boule of Sigma Pi Phi, y'all heard of the Boule, right? Chartered in 1920, the 27th Club, founded in 1924, the 27th Club, which was organized by Dr. Edward G. Bowden, consisted of 27 married men from the ages of 27 to 50. The prophet said, take unto thyself a wife and become a faithful member of what? Society. That's that word again, right? Okay. Charles H. Johnson, William F. Penn, Thomas Heather Slater, George A. Towns, William J. Trent, and August T. Walden. Last paragraph I'm going to read. Most of the local graduate and undergraduate chapters of the 8 Greek letter fraternities and sororities, Alpha Phi, Alpha Phi, Alpha, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Delta Sigma Theta, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Phi Beta Sigma, Sigma Gamma Rho, and Zeta Phi Beta were established in Atlanta between 1919 and 1930, though several came much later. In 1921, Phi Beta Sigma and Omega Psi Phi held their national conventions in Atlanta. They united in 2 resolutions calling for the Interfraternal Conference and supporting the Dyer anti-lynch bill. The groups were very civic-minded, and while they enjoyed their annual dances and tea reading and discussing the latest literature and competing in athletic competition, the issue confronting them had to be addressed, which was the Negro problem, and what was happening to Negroes. Islam? Problem is, they couldn't solve it. They had little bandages on it. Bandages on a hemorrhage, right? But they couldn't solve it because they were still Negroes. Islam? So what they agreed on amongst themselves is, what we'll do is, we'll get a certain amount of us that are, the elite, okay? And we'll keep and usher power unto ourselves, okay? The ones that come up under us, we'll rule over them. That'll give us a step up on those of our kindred who don't have the degrees. Sounds similar to the Irish overseers that were on slave plantations, right? Who couldn't read or write, and might have had a morsel more to eat than you did. But were happy to rule over you because at least I get a chance when I'm frustrated to be the Negro. That was his liberation in his mind. Brother Akim.
Islam, I rise giving the highest of praise to Allah and the highest of honor to his noble and divine prophet, Ali.
Islam.
Coming from, having graduated from the AU Center, I hear a lot of the verbiage and a lot of the talk that you're speaking of. In your passage, it sounds a lot like Booker T. Washington and the Talented Tim.
That's how W.E.B.
Du Bois.
Du Bois. Let's say it like he would want to say.
Du Bois and the Talented Tim.
That's right.
Rhetoric as well in terms of the step up in terms of having someone solo to be able to raise yourself up to a certain degree.
Indeed. And you know, this is unfortunate. I mean, if you look at the discourse that took place between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey,
Yeah.
it was very savage.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, Du Bois would, every chance he had a podium and Garvey came up, he would call Marcus Garvey a big, black, uneducated gorilla. Europeans. This is Asiatic on Asiatic.
That's right.
Right? Unlettered, ignorant, you know, full of pomp and arrogance, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right? The irony of it is that Marcus Garvey was a Prince Hall Mason. We don't talk about it, but he was. Right? When you see him with the Napoleon style looking hat, that's the Knights Templar degree. Right? And Du Bois was, you know, a Greek letter fraternity. Right? So what you're talking about was two Asiatic orders banging on each other. Right? That's basically what it was. Right? And the irony of it was Marcus Garvey had a Back to Africa movement. You know, and Du Bois slandered him for that. Where did Du Bois die at? In Ghana. So he got to a certain point after Garvey, you know, was deported.
That's right.
This man was right.
That's right.
Right? But I'm not going to tell nobody. I'm going to go myself to Ghana and die as an African. Islam? You know, which, you know, to plumb that line, there's not much salvation in African either.
Indeed. I've seen the statues.
Read the Dred Scott case in full, and it'll tell you that. Negroes of the African race. That term, because it's an ambiguous term. What is an African?
That's right.
What is an African? What are the customs of an African? What's the African language? Give me that one.
Right.
Or how about the African flag? Don't tell me the red, black, and green. That's a banner. Representing the idea. It's not the flag of any landmass.
That's right.
Islam? All right? One more piece I'd like to leave you with before I move to another section, before we have to lower the meeting. Some years ago, one of the Moabites in the temple was at a Korean market. And I believe this is the page, yes. And she doesn't read Korean, but she picked it up and was just flipping through and looking at the pictures. And, you know, so she picked it up and looked like this in the front. She was like, okay, this look like some Europeans over here in 13 colonies or something, right? She flipped it over and saw this. Right? So she brought it to the temple. For the camera. Can you zoom in on that more? So she brought it to the temple, you know, figured it may be of some use. So I demonstrated on it for, you know, a couple of weeks, just on the images alone, but it was bothering me because I was like, I don't know what it's saying. Because it'd be saying something crazy about our forefathers, right? So, you know, I said, you know, I gave it back to the sister, could you go back to where you got it from? I asked him on his dad that speaks Korean to translate for you. She was like, sure, no problem. So she went back, came back with translation. And loosely, it was basically saying that it was talking about the slave trade, right? And it was talking about right immediately before power, the ones that were in power were these ones called the Moors.
Islam.
Now here's the Koreans, right? Know who you are. See, this whole thing is why I say, like, when y'all go around the world talking about y'all want sympathy because some Europeans who've only been civilized for about 300 years took you out your civilization. And what was me, and look what they're doing to us. And the world is like, who y'all think y'all fooling? We know who y'all are. We know y'all are the Moors. We as the European from that voice, right? We painted thousands of pictures of you honoring you as gods, right? I think we went through that a few weeks ago, the Orientalist paintings. Write that down for those who don't know. If you type in Moorish Orientalist, like Oriental with an IST on the end, right? Or African Orientalist, just for the Google, you have to look it up that way. Or, like I like to do, I put everything. I put Moorish, African, Orientalist. In Spain, I do everything, you know, so when you do it, thousands of pictures are going to come up, like looking like the first poster up front. This was painted by a German named Ludwig von Deutsch. A German. Now, let me ask you, any artists in the room? Anybody draw? Oh yeah, we got to talk later too. And we definitely got to talk too. But I promote the arts. That's what I'm so easy. But the point is that when you draw, when you channel, because that's what y'all are, spirit mediums, right? When you're channeling images from the universe, right? Is there anything in you to say, I want to channel a painting of Donald Trump? Respect to Donald Trump. But I'm just like, there's nothing in you that would want to do that. Take your time to do that, correct?
Oh.
I don't want to speak for y'all, am I right?
Right.
Oh, praise God. Okay. But why would the Europeans paint thousands of pictures showing you not as slaves,
That's right.
but as noble rulers,
Right.
showing you bathing their women because they didn't know how to bathe. Bringing them in civilization. You know? Showing you cutting their heads off of people who violated the law, because we believe the law is swift and impartial. Keep in mind, just for the camera, we do not support the beheadings that are taking place. I don't want that visit. Be clear. Talking ain't the old world. Y'all had some wild old world stuff too. But the point is that, you know, why paint those things unless what they were experiencing when they were in our sultanates, you know, we don't say kingdoms, but in our sultanates, was nothing short of divine.
That's right.
They'd never seen nothing like it.
Love.
You know what I'm saying? Lit streets, sidewalks, aqueducts, y'all call them sewers now. You know, all this type of stuff. Air conditioning, y'all know y'all had that, right? You know, heat when it was cold, air conditioning when it was, you know, and nothing with freon and all this type of stuff. You know, it's talking about redirecting water there. You know?
That's right.
Working in harmony with nature like you're supposed to do.
That's right.
You see? So when you're going around talking about you a black man, kill him in the street. He don't know who he is. He ain't got a clue. Kill him. Ain't nothing gonna happen.
That's right.
Now look, we all watched it. OJ got paroled, didn't he? I watched it too. Don't be, that's all it is what it is. We know he gonna get locked up again. We know that, don't we? We know as soon as October comes, he gets out, he's gonna go get him another European woman. We know that, don't we? OJ ain't got no nationality. Divine creed, principles, free national standards, nothing. Right? But he ain't the only one. You know, he just happens to be under the microscope. Right? So even if you're awake, is everybody in your family awake? I give honors to Sister Lamani, because that's her sister, right? She got her sister in the temple. Praise Allah for that. I know that wasn't easy. I ain't seen this sister since. It's been some years. Good to see you again, sister. Well, you got a serious way to welcome you, right? But the point is, she brought her sister to the temple. I don't know what the conversation was like. I don't want to recreate it, right? But nevertheless, she's here, right? And that's what it's about. It does no good if you get this for yourself, right? A question was posed to me earlier, and it was loosely, once you proclaim your nationality, then what? I'm going to pose that question to card-holding members of the Lord Science Temple of Record in the room right now. Once you proclaimed your nationality, right, what was the work that needed to be picked up, that you needed to do? Card-holding members, don't be silent now. You stood right here saying, I am a citizen of the USA, no neutrality to profit. Right? So what was the work that needed to be done immediately afterwards?
Helping uplift.
Helping uplift all humanity.
You can say it louder.
Helping uplift all humanity.
Okay. And to teach our people those things to do what? Necessary to make them what?
Better citizens.
Better citizens.
Better citizens. Right? So that's the mission statement, the unofficial mission statement of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Right? To uplift fallen humanity and to teach those things necessary to make our people better citizens. Islam? All right? Now, you could wear your fez every day if you want to. Praise Allah for that. Right? But even if you didn't wear your fez, you're supposed to represent the principles that the fez stands for. Islam? The fez represents law and civilization. Right? There are various different nations around the planet that have your fez. Right? Y'all have heard of the nation called the Philippines. Right? Well, have you heard of the mortal wars that took place in the Philippines? M-O-R-O wars. Okay? And the national hero that brought nationality to them, ironically, his name was Datu Ali. That name, Ali, is something else that just pops up everywhere. Right? Datu Ali, y'all do stand up, was his height. Grown man. He fought the European nations off. Spain was trying to come. The United States was trying to encroach. Right? These little brothers and sisters got together in turbans and fezzes, by the way. Look it up. Don't believe me. Check it out for yourself, please. See, I want to be proven wrong so I can go back to sleep. But I can't sleep because I know all this stuff. Right? Well, I'll be up all kind of hours, and y'all know. I'm sending me messages and stuff. Look what I found. sisters and no. These two right here, and they're a couple, by the way. So I know they don't sleep. Praise Allah. But you research them, and you'll find out that before the Europeans came in there, they wouldn't call themselves Filipinos.
That's right.
They don't speak Filipino, they speak Tagalog. That's their language, right? But their nationality, if you was to ask them before the Europeans got there, I'm more.
That's right.
Islam, right? So when did everybody around the planet start becoming blacks and Negroes? Let me read this real quick, and then move forward. Prophet wrote an article years ago. Let me get the exact date. October 26th, 1928. This was a Moorish Guide article, and it's entitled, "So This is Chicago." It says, all nations of the earth are now being forced to contribute their share in this American life. Some of the nations here are put at a disadvantage, supposedly because they happen to have the hue of every other nation of the globe. They have been victims of a peculiar psychology designed to hold them in mental slavery. So long as men permit other nations to furnish them with their food for thought, just so long as they do allow their heads to supplant their advisors. What will happen among the Asiatics of the world will first happen in the United States of America. And the first cosmopolitan city of this nation will be in Chicago. This is Chicago, the only city of the land that has all of the features of this American life engaged in by our people. Aldermen seated in the council of the city. Men high in official affairs of the city generally. There is but one Chicago. So the prophet was using Chicago as a template, showing us where we need to be in government. Right? He said men in high official affairs of the city. And he said aldermen, which is, we say city councilman down here, seated in the council of the city. Islam? One of the prophecies, because don't forget he was prophet, Noble Jurali, right? So he has prophecies. One of his prophecies was, what will happen among the Asiatics of the world will first happen in the United States of America, right? The article's entitled, "So This is Chicago," right? But what's taking place in Chicago now, I can turn that into a question. So this is Chicago? Right? And if he said, what will happen to the Asiatics of the world will first happen to the Asiatics here in America, well, what's happening to the Asiatics in America in Chicago? We're slaughtering each other. Civil war. So if that's the complexion of what's going to, or the barometer of what's going to take place with the Asiatics of the world, y'all got to do your job. Y'all got to, get these free national standards and principles back to the people, right? People who are willing to do the work, right? Because it has to be something special about you to take on this work. Because you're going to be hated, you're going to be slandered, your family going to say you're crazy, you change the dietary laws and say I don't eat meat no more, I'm a vegan, and they had that family barbecue, and you invited, and they got the slab of ribs on the pit. Come on, get you some of these ribs. Well, I'm a vegan. Oh, vegan? What's that? Well, I don't eat any, animal byproducts. Boy, you was raised on pork. Get you some of these ribs. Boy, stop playing. You got to stand strong for all of that. Islam, and with the spirit of love, you can't even retaliate as a Moorish American Muslim. You can't go back at them and, you got to give them the spirit of love. You got to give them the message that you were seeking. You got to be that message. Islam? So the prophet says this is a field open to strong men and women. Islam? He says if you think that your condition can be better, join the Moorish Science Temple of America. Islam? All right? And with that, what I'd like to do before we lower the meeting, we have a brother tonight who proclaimed his nationality last week. And due to no one else's fault but my own, I was not present last week. So the brother got his card, but he didn't receive his fez. Right? Well, we're going to issue the brother's fez tonight. Islam?
Islam.
Brother Q? Come on up, brother.